Dan Willis worked for the US Navy. He was a specialist in electronic communications with a top secret crypto clearance. He subsequently worked in the radio industry as a newsman. He was one of the witnesses in the Disclosure Project press conference in 2001. He then worked on new energy initiatives with Dr. Stephen Greer and a number of new energy inventors. And he has done a lot of research on the theories and the evidence concerning crashed UFOs and the reverse engineering of captured technologies. And today he's with us to discuss the success of these reverse engineering efforts in top secret corporations and military projects.
You are listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Well, welcome back, Dan, to Exopolitics Today.
Oh, it's always great to join you, Michael, in educating the public so we can move on to our Star Trek future and expose the deceptions.
Well, there's definitely a lot of deceptions going out there. And I know that there's been recent reports and many so-called experts have come forward commenting about the whistleblower testimonies that have been made available or circulated through various mainstream news sources. Of course, people know of David Grush and people know of Bob Lazar, Dr. Eric Davis, and many others that have spoken to the Arrow office. And the information or the perspective that comes across is that some captured extraterrestrial or non-human intelligent craft are in the possession of corporations and the military, but these have not been successfully reverse engineered. And so the narrative that is emerging is that, yes, we have some of the craft, they're non-human intelligence, but we have not been able to reverse engineer those. So I think you've presented or you've developed a lot of data. You have a full presentation addressing that question. So anything else you want to kind of like bring up in terms of how important this issue is of just to what extent have we been successful in reverse engineering captured extraterrestrial technologies?
Well, when you look back through history and look at authenticated documents that have leaked, you look at witness testimonies, you look at events, and when you start putting it all together, it starts to become clear who are the gatekeepers that are deceiving the public for whatever reason that is keeping us from moving forward, because these advanced technologies, yes, they threaten certain industries that, if we had anti-gravity, we had free energy, you can imagine what a change in the world it would be and what a change it would be to certain industries. And so, and not only financially, but also there appears to be what people term as a deep state that has a certain agenda for humanity that wants to perpetuate certain beliefs and ideas about the extraterrestrial reality. And so we're going to explore that.
Great. So let's begin with this core claim that has been made out there that is part of what I think is a kind of limited hangout, that we've made little or no progress in reverse engineering extraterrestrial technologies.
All right, I've put together a little slideshow, and here we go. Okay, what indications show anti-gravity craft already exist? Going back to 1915, Nikola Tesla made an interesting statement. He said, "My flying machine will have neither wings nor propellers. You might see it on the ground. You would never guess it was a flying machine, yet It will be able to move through the air in any direction with perfect safety. In 1919, you have Maria Orsic, who Tesla was in communication with. She was receiving telepathic messages from the Albarian solar system that gave technical construction details that her father gave to Dr. Schumann, who found viable physics for development.
Can I just throw in here,
Yeah.
Dan, as far as Maria Orsic is concerned, there was a recent remote viewing, probably about a month ago, just over a month and a half ago, by Dick Allgaier and a team of remote viewers that are associated with him, and they basically confirmed that Maria Orsic was in fact working on these flying saucer craft, the Vril technologies. So that was good to get that independent corroboration that all of the information that people have been putting out on Maria Orsic as being part of this kind of pre-Nazi German culture or development of these flying saucer craft using anti-gravity technology, that's actually based on real events and not fiction.
Yeah, it's incredible. She received it in ancient Sumerian script, and as we know, the Vril Society was more benevolent focused than the Nazi SS. Indeed. 1934, Nazi SS developed operational anti-gravity craft 20 years before the U.S. with assistance of the Draco extraterrestrials, the Carr Empire, as Professor Hermann Oberth, who was Wernher von Braun's mentor, stated, we had help from the people of other worlds. And so we know who the people of other worlds was. 1930.
Yes. Just wanted to kind of like, when he says we had help from the people of other worlds, probably worth just clarifying for people that there were two sets of extraterrestrial groups. One was a positive human-looking Nordic group out of Aldebaran that was associated with Maria Orsic, and they were benevolent. And then you had the Draco reptilians who worked through the Nazis. And so both groups were helping Germany at different stages to develop these technologies. And of course, the Nazis came to power in 1933, a decade after Orsic and W.O. Schumann had been working on the Vril prototypes that had been channeled. So we had two different groups of extraterrestrials working with the Germans and then later the Nazis. And I think throughout the Nazi era, there was a real struggle in terms of, on the one hand, Orsic wanted to move the flying saucer program in a more peaceful, benign direction, whereas the Nazi SS wanted to weaponize them for conquest.
That's right. Yeah, it seems they had. Well, there was also a crash in the Black Forest. I forget the year, but they had several different resources to assist in their advanced development. Indeed. And a single U.S. Navy spy, as William Tompkins testified, found the space program that the Nazi was doing and reported it to Navy Secretary James Forrestal, who that gave him the incentive to start the Navy spy program in Germany. Secret Nazi SS documents gathered by Vladimir Trzerski at the fall of the Soviet Union showed that a number of anti-gravity craft designs by Nazi Germany had been developed. You have the Haunebu 1, 2, 3, 4, and you have the Andromeda device, which is a big cigar shape. And of course, if you have anti-gravity craft, why wouldn't you establish a moon base in 1942?
Dan, I just wanted to kind of like comment there on Vladimir Trzynski, because he came out in 1991 talking about these documents, giving lectures in California, and that was based on documents that he received through his association with the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, because Bulgaria was part of the Warsaw Pact and when the Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact collapsed, all of these top secret documents that were held by the different intelligence agencies, rather than now everything being controlled by a centralized Soviet KGB, now you had all these different states that were created with their own intelligence kind of operations and initiatives, and everyone trying to make a quick buck. So that's how those documents were shared with Vladimir Kaczynski. But the thing that I found very interesting was that probably only 2 years after he began revealing all these documents and making them available, he literally disappeared. I haven't found anything about him from around 1993, 1994. He just disappeared off the map. So I suspect they kind of just took him out of the picture. The Americans probably realized how damaging these documents were and just took him out of the picture.
Oh my God, he hit a nerve. The last thing they wanted the public to know is that the Germans had developed their secret space program and had advanced anti-gravity craft. That was like so yeah, I would see that would be, he had a window of opportunity. He seized it. And fortunately, we have these documents available to help substantiate from many other different perspectives that the Germans did have a breakaway civilization with advanced anti-gravity craft. Okay. And, before the end of the war, they grabbed all their good stuff and left the bad stuff behind, for Forrestal and Kennedy, to review back at the end of the war. But they took all the good stuff down with them to Antarctica, and over 100 U-boats and 250,000 Germans and the Reich's top scientists were unaccounted for. They took this from Germany and they set up their secret space program down Antarctica, as your book details very well.
Yeah, you mentioned Forrestal and Kennedy, so it's worth just mentioning that both the Navy and the Air Force both had an interest in finding all of the advanced aerospace, the technologies that the Nazis had developed, and of course you had I think it was Project Lusty. That was an Air Force operation where they sent Professor Theodore von Karman from California Institute of Technology over to occupy Germany to find the kind of like advanced technologies. And also you had James Forrestal going there, taking with him a young John F. Kennedy to take a look at what technologies were there to see what would be brought back to the US for the Navy to develop, because both the Navy and the Air Force have aviation programs at the time, and of course those have evolved into aerospace initiatives ever since.
And they were so the leftovers that they left behind, it was still impressed them enough that they wanted to start Operation Paperclip, to bring these scientists over, because they knew that they had advanced considerably and wanted to pick their brains and try to get that technology for the U.S. and so Soviets did too, I'm sure. This isn't, the Rockefellers seem to always worked in alliance with the Nazis. It shocked me when I found out that the Rockefeller Foundation actually had the history of World War II rewritten. The purpose would be, of course, in my viewpoint, to hide the Nazi escape and the infiltration that they had planned to go into the United States. So, school children studying in the future, they would have no clue. So they do this through generational indoctrination, so that the people of today, the children of today, they don't have any idea of what happened back in the end of World War II. Which one of the major events was when Forrestal sent Admiral Byrd to attack the Nazi base in Antarctica. Their anti-gravity craft with directed energy weapons wiped out their aircraft, and they basically had to sign, swear everybody to secrecy, and that was the end of that story. 1951 started the Project Dove. The first one was The Day the Earth Stood Still, which wasn't an evil alien movie. It was more, if you continue to extend your violence, this Earth of yours will be reduced to a burned out cinder, Klaatu was saying. But he started a series of videos that the CIA, U.S. Air Force psychological operation, every single Hollywood movie that has to do with the extraterrestrial issue, they had their hands in forming the script. And so you have, War of the Worlds, Invaders from Mars, Flying Saucers Attack, and, so forth. And then you have the 50s with all the silly B movies. But the people don't know what extraterrestrials are like. And so Hollywood is the only source that's forming their perceptions, and they wanted to control that.
Well, what's interesting there in that selection of movies, of course, with The Day the Earth Stood Still, that presents the extraterrestrials in a kind of positive light as peacemakers of the galaxy, and the Earth was in a very barbaric state and would be severely punished if they continued their warlike ways. Whereas in these other movies, you have clearly a psychological operation to depict aliens as evil, barbaric, and that we would face a war of the worlds in the future. So I guess we could say that in the early 1950s, you already see these two kind of factions or two different groups trying to influence the public perceptions. And of course, one group evolved. I think the group, this Project Dove, or that positive group, evolved into the kind of like the Star Trek Future Initiative, and the other group kind of like got behind the whole War of the Worlds perception or narrative.
I agree with you, Michael. It seems to be two factions. One was the Star Trek group that wanted to kind of catch us up, on what's been hidden for a long time. And then you have another group that evil aliens are out there. They want to kill all of us and take over our planet, So you have these two factions that are, influencing Hollywood. And we all know Hollywood has been influenced for a long time. Now, the reason we don't have anti-gravity craft, anybody that's come up with, figuring out the torsion physics of how to create an anti-gravitic effect, if you come up with some way to do that, you'll get a national security order, have somebody show up at your door. And this goes back to 1952. So, and anybody that from that point forward has come forward, they have been suppressed. 1952, the same year, you've got the Nazi craft flying over Washington, D.C., apparently to intimidate the Truman and Eisenhower administration with flexing their high technology in front of, our jets and everything are like primitive compared to the flying saucer technology they have.
Just on that, if we go back to that, what I find interesting is that recently there was a confirmation that shoot-down orders had been issued by President Truman to Air Force and I guess Navy pilots, and that one of the flying saucer craft was shot at and a part of it broke off and was retrieved. And then you have the information that Truman was convinced by Professor Albert Einstein to rescind the shoot-down orders. So he was told that, well, if you keep this up, you can start a kind of interplanetary war. So I guess you had officially or initially you had resistance to the flyovers, and shoot-down orders were given. And then they realized that whoever was flying those craft were too advanced, and if you started to shoot them down, there'd be big repercussions, so better to just stand down. And apparently that's what happened.
That would be a logical conclusion. Einstein, of course, he didn't know there were German, not extraterrestrial. And we need to keep the public from knowing that these Germans have anti-gravity craft. And so, we have George Adamski as an asset of an MJ-12 psychological operation to divert the public's awareness from the Nazi craft that may appear here and there accidentally, to make them believe that they're space brothers from Venus.
Yeah, on that, Dan, can you maybe elaborate? Because I'm going to be interviewing Glenn Steckling Stern, who is a big supporter of George Adamski, and that he was in communication with the Positive Space Brothers. So, I mean, he doesn't accept the idea that George Adamski or was in any way associated with the German space program. So, what would you say that would make it persuasive that this was in fact that George Adamski or the flying saucers he was interacting with were part of a German program, as opposed to genuinely Venusians operating out of an underground base there?
Well, I think if it wasn't for Vladimir Trzecki that revealed the documents that showed what the Hanabu 2 looks like, I think they would have gotten away with it, and they would have thought that the photograph that Adamski took, which you can see is absolutely identical to the German Hanabu 2, is kind of a hard argument to say that these are, or that they somehow, the Germans happen to duplicate the. Now, we know that Val Thor came from Venus on a craft back in, I think it's 1957. And so he was a Venetian. He had a very beautiful looking craft, from what I understand. I don't think, it looks, if you look at the Hanabu 2, it looks like 1940s kind of technology, with the portholes and everything. And so to think that it's a Venetian craft, I would say there's probably the extreme high probability that this was one of the German craft, and that we're using it. When you take in consideration that Adamski was flown every time he had an encounter to the Pentagon, and he had special access. And the fact that the Vatican wanted to have containment on this issue, which was, the Vatican has a long history of working with the Fourth Reich and the Third Reich, and they actually gave him an award, from the Pope. There's a lot of indicative evidence that this was a psychological operation, because they needed to keep the public from becoming aware that the Germans had broken away and created their own space program. So that's my viewpoint.
Okay, well, I think that something William Tompkins shared with me, with a few of us, was that the Germans were given, I think he said, like 30 different prototypes, or they were working on different prototypes of anti-gravity craft that were given to them by the Draco reptilians. So it's possible that the Draco got one of these Venusian bell-shaped craft and just handed it over to the Nazis and said, here it is. You can make copies of these guys. So that's another possibility that's worth exploring. Yeah.
It's good to look at all possibilities and assume nothing. I remember Tompkins saying, they got brand spanking new spacecraft that were fully operational, and the Draco reptilians, whether they grabbed a hold of one of the Venetian craft, remains unknown. Okay, moving forward. We got a lot of slides here. And this is one of the reasons they had to have, in my opinion, Adamski make them think that it was, Venetians. As they started landing their craft in Oahu and Nebraska, and the craft, they didn't try to hide that they were German. They had swastikas and iron crosses. The pilots had Nazi uniforms. They were talking in the High German language. So they weren't trying to hide. So I think these are two rare incidences that were recorded. One in 1956, one in 1957, that Nazi craft did land and the public witnessed it. Okay, any thoughts on that, Michael?
Well, yeah, I think that is a very important part of history, that you had these observations of German-speaking pilots and crew on these flying saucers, that different contactees like Reinhold Schmidt and others, he wasn't the only one that interacted with them. And of course, that famous incident that I thought was really fascinating, Willard Wanell in Oahu, where he saw a craft land and people got out wearing Nazi uniforms with German accents. So, right there, I think it's quite clear that some of these flying saucer craft that were supposedly belonging to the friendly Space Brothers were in fact part of a German anti-gravity fleet operating out of Antarctica.
I could be wrong, but Orthon, the contact of Adamski, I heard somewhere, I'm not sure of this, but that he had a German accent. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I know initially when Adamski communicated with him, they communicated through sign language. Apparently, Orthon couldn't communicate in English, and so they communicated in sign language. And then when Adamski got on one of the craft, Orthon was speaking to another member of the crew in a foreign language, and Adamski never identified what the foreign language was, and so being a former Pole, you'd think he'd know what German sounds like, but yeah, I mean that was my initial conclusion, that probably that foreign language was German.
Yeah, these little clues like the Benny and Barney Hill, where Barney sees an evil-eyed Nazi on board the craft, with the abduction back in the 60s. Okay, yeah, definitely the Germans were flying around. Now, Dr. Stephen Greer in 2013 testified before former members of Congress that of October 1954, apparently an NSA agent was in the vault, and he said that since that date, we have not needed rockets, jets, internal combustion engines, or surface roadways between cities. I say this with authority that this is the case. So it's just kind of interesting. This is a whole 20 years after the Germans had successfully, with their first prototypes, achieved anti-gravity. The U.S. has anti-gravity.
And of course, there were a whole lot of publications in major aeronautical magazines at that time, in the kind of mid-50s, early to mid-50s, saying that anti-gravity was the new propulsion system, that engineers were mastering it, and soon they would be developing fleets of these anti-gravity craft. And then towards the latter 1950s, everything went dark.
That's right.
No more publications at all. So that's clearly everything went classified. And I would agree that was when they realized that anti-gravity was a viable propulsion system for new generation of kind of aerospace vehicles. But rather than making that benefit the general public and replacing the rocket industry, they decided they'd have it all classified and just keep it for the benefit of the military and intelligence community.
Indeed, yeah, much evidence to that fact. A fellow friend and the late Mark McCandish, in 2001, he testified as one of the witnesses that back in the 1950s, they had developed what's called alien reproduction vehicles that could go faster than the speed of light. There was actually a military pilot was actually able to take a photo of one, and it matches as it was a Norton Air Force special exhibit for high brass. This was a pretty major testimony by Mark.
Yeah, looking at that diagram, I discussed it in my US Air Force Secret Space Program book and in the Space Force book. I mean, you have 3 different designs, 3 different configurations. And what I did was I matched them up with the Hannibal 1, Hannibal 2, and Hannibal 3 prototypes that the Germans had developed. And it seemed to me pretty clear that these 3 different configurations were pretty much a match for the Hannibal 1, 2, and 3 that the Germans had developed in the 1930s and 40s. So I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, like a mama and papa and baby ARV. I sat down with Mark in the Hilton Hotel in Washington, D.C. At the bar, and he went over. He knew I had a good technical background, and he went over and described all the details before we went to testify at the National Press Club, how the alien reproduction vehicle worked with a Tesla configuration around a Mercury core in the middle that would activate and create mass canceling, and that the capacitors below it's sort of a primitive thing. You had this little ball that the pilot would operate, and as you move it one way or another, it changed the charge on the bottom of the capacitors and moves the craft in different directions. Okay, onward. As you mentioned, Michael, Young Men Magazine had an article that said the G engines, the gravity engines, in other words, are coming. And after that publication came out, nada, totally quiet. Then shortly after, we have NASA, who's run by a former Nazi SS officer, keeping us believing we need rockets to overcome gravity. But I think the Nazis knew full well that this was a good way to control the technical development of space in the United States by creating this agency that keeps us believing we need rockets. Maybe sometime Elon will get his hands on the other technology.
Yeah, just I wanted to comment there with that picture of Dr. Kurt Debus and NASA. For people that still questioning or skeptical of the Nazi involvement or influence over NASA. I mean, you have William Tompkins saying that in 1961 that he took the initiative and took a proposal to have Douglas Aircraft Company play a design role for the Kennedy Space Center, and that as he drove to Huntsville, Alabama, which was where the Nazis were based. I mean, that was run by Werner von Braun at the time. He says he saw full-blown swastikas on the drive, that this was a Nazi facility in the United States running NASA or running the NASA Apollo program. And this was in 1961. And people that are skeptical of that claim of William Tompkins, I mean, he has documents showing that he actually met with Dr. Debus, and that he was part of the design committee for the Kennedy Space Center. So he had documents proving that, yeah, he was communicating and working with Dr. Debus. So that to me is like very persuasive evidence that, yeah, in fact, there was a close connection between this kind of Nazi breakaway faction that survived in Antarctica and was working with Project Paperclip scientists out of Huntsville, Alabama, and eventually the Kennedy Space Center.
Like an inside joke of the Fourth Reich, they put it in your face. Yeah, you heard that Hans Kammler, who was Himmler of the SS, he was in charge of the special projects. He was in there with a meeting with Dubus and Werner von Braun. Let's see, I'm not sure if it was Tompkins or the other astronaut that
Clark McClelland.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, so Hans Kammler shows up. Okay, onward. There's so much on each one of these. Now, Tesla knew how to create an anti-gravity vehicle, and he showed Otis Carr in 1937 how to do that. So by 1959, Otis Carr created and patented his, he called it an OTC X1 spacecraft. He actually got a patent, but they had to patent it as a amusement device, right? So 2 weeks after the successful flight, which Ralph Ring was one of the pilots on that, the FBI and other government agencies in a secret raid shut down the whole operation and confiscated everything. The FBI told Carr that you're being closed because a threat to overthrow the monetary system of the United States. In other words, if he had this kind of technology, as we mentioned earlier, it would definitely affect certain industries. They wanted to keep anti-gravity suppressed, obviously, at this time period.
And I guess also the energy system behind it, like the torsion field physics and how that could lead to kind of new energy systems that would propel these anti-gravity craft. That all of that threatened the electrical power industry at the time, or the fossil fuel industry, and they just shut it down. And of course, if they hadn't done that, I mean, we'd all have flying cars and probably be commuting to our floating homes up in the upper atmosphere.
Oh, if that got out, it would open a Pandora's box of a change in our civilization. But we're still, it's amazing how they've been able to do it all these decades. And then at a lecture at the UCLA School of Engineering, Ben Rich, head of Lockheed Skunk Works, says, quote, "We already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black projects, and it would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. Anything you can imagine, we already know how to do." So here's Ben Rich, a very authoritative figure that would be on the inside, because Lockheed's been very involved all along on these black projects.
Just on that, it would take an act of God to get these technologies out of the black projects. I mean, that is, I think, very, very interesting, and it kind of reveals to us that the way in which these technologies have been reverse engineered has led to them becoming the proprietary right of these corporations. And there is something that I didn't know, but Hal Puthoff revealed it. He in a kind of presentation at the Sol Foundation, he kind of spilled the beans. He said there's something called an internal research and development arrangement, whereby the government or the military throws money at a corporation and says, "You study this." But because it's designated an internal research and development, everything that they receive becomes the proprietary domain of that corporation. So that's why I think Rich said it would take an act of God to get these black projects out into the public arena, because all of this advanced technology that the Air Force and the Navy have been encountering over the last 50, 60 years, that they've taken it to the corporations and said, "You study this and reverse engineer it for us." But in the process, they kind of like have to sign these IRADs so that the corporation can then kind of like study it and put their resources into it to understand it, but then they own it. So it really means that in the future we have to reinvent the wheel, because the corporations, like Ben Rich said, they're not going to release this stuff.
That's probably pretty accurate, because the corporations aren't going to let go of this, and the military doesn't have the scientists and the resources and everything to reverse engineering. Of course, they would give it to the corporations that have those abilities to try to develop this, and then of course the corporations aren't going to do it for nothing. So yeah, that totally makes sense. Okay, something I got involved in. We testified in 2001 regarding illegal secret government operations and extraterrestrial presence, 21 witnesses. Now, this was green-lighted by Admiral Thomas Wilson, being denied access into these unacknowledged special access programs that are run by the corporations. This is what brought this about. And this event inspired, besides you, Doctor, a hacker in the UK, Gary McKinnon, who revealed they wanted to put him away for 70 years in prison for this, the U.S. Navy Solar Warden secret space program. But I think the fact that, he was able to show the USSS LeMay and the Hill and Cotter and the fleet-to-fleet transfers and non-terrestrial officers, and he was downloading one of the images before his connection got lost of a large cigar-shaped craft. This is a kind of a key because there's not much leaks that come out with the secret space program with the Solar Warden program. I think it was a major event that he revealed, and he didn't make this up. In 2002, since Admiral Wilson was denied access, which he was quite upset about in his constitutional authority, he had a meeting with Dr. Eric Davis and in the Admiral's limo, and Dr. Davis recorded it and transcribed it, and it later got leaked as the Admiral Wilson memo. And they're talking about they were working on technology not of this earth, not made by human hands.
Yeah, and this is just, I think, a good example of how these classified reverse engineering projects operate as corporate-run projects that are governed by these internal research and development agreements with the military, that even high-level military officials like Admiral Wilson, who was at the time in 1997 when he tried to get access, I mean, he was the deputy director of the Defense Intelligence Agency and also the deputy director of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Intelligence Division, that he was denied access.
Yeah,
and he actually became director as well, and he was still denied access.
Yeah, he was the J2 position, head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I mean, if anybody should have had access, this man should have had access. That's why he was so upset. And they threatened him, to drop the matter immediately, or you're going to see an early retirement and lose rank. And so he was mad. That's why he had this meeting with Dr. Eric Davis. He wanted to find out more about what was going on behind the scenes, since he couldn't get it through his normal channels because he was not on the quote, the bigot list is what they call it, a list of people who have access into these programs. And apparently he didn't fit the personality profile, somebody who would spill the beans possibly, so yeah, he was denied access, and that's what brought about the event that I participated in.
Well, in terms of who denied him access, there was a committee called the Special Access Program Oversight Committee that denied him access. But what I found interesting was that later on I learned that Christopher Mellon was a member of that Special Access Program Oversight Committee. That I don't know if it was he was on it at the time Wilson was denied, and he served on it later on. But I have heard that he did at one point serve on that same committee that denied access to Admiral Wilson. So that suggests that Chris Mellon may know a lot more than he's publicly revealing about these classified reverse engineering programs happening at different corporations.
Yeah, there's always certain people that they always roll out in the media. Chris Mellon's one of them. You have Louis Elizondo. You've got Nick Pope. You have certain personalities that the mainstream media, as you and I know, have been infiltrated back some time ago, and the deep state elements, especially operating, through the New York Times and so forth, through all their major 6 corporations, they want to project a certain perception out into the public, and so they bring out certain people that maintain the narrative. Okay, there's actually a patent for a triangular spacecraft, anti-gravitic, back in 2006 that was granted. And in 2018, U.S. Navy was granted a patent for an advanced anti-gravity aircraft design and acknowledges that it was operable. Okay, in 2021, both of these testimonies would have confirmed we have anti-gravity technology that's operational. Way back in November of 2019, former U.S. Air Force intelligence specialist, was he an intelligence specialist or was it electronic specialist? I'm not clear on that. But
I think his military occupation specialty had something to do with intelligence specialist, or maybe it was electronic communications. Actually, I can't remember.
Which the two kind of go together. You have to have a sort of high level security clearance in that area. But Mike Turber, he claimed that the Nimitz incident that they saturated the media with, that even your grandmother knows about the Nimitz Tic Tac, comes out 2 years later. I mean, who would come out and reveal that the Tic Tac was property of the Air Force, and then 2 years later come out and make a special video and say, I just made the whole thing up. There's nothing to it. It was a psychological test, right? I mean, who does that? And then 1 week later, my dear friend Mark McCandish, who was planning on testifying at the June 2021 UFO UAP hearing, that we had anti-gravity craft built back in the 1950s, was found dead with a gunshot to his head. So did somebody happen to visit both of these people that week? And Mike decided to go on YouTube and say, I just made the whole thing up. And Mark said, buzz off, and then they wanted to keep this quiet, and that's my perspective anyway.
Yeah, I think that was clearly a push was coming to shape the narrative concerning UFOs that appeared near the Nimitz and the Navy ships in 2004 and 2018. And that they wanted to depict those things as clearly something that was unknown, as opposed to something that could have been reverse engineered. So people like Mike Turber and Mark McCandlish, they threatened the narrative that was being pushed. So one way or the other, they were silenced.
So true, Michael. So true. And then everybody's familiar with David Grush, that came out and said that we have secret UFO ET craft reverse engineering operations before House of Representatives hearing, and that they had non-human spacecraft along with their dead pilots. Now, who has claimed that we don't have anti-gravity technology fully developed from reverse engineering craft? we have to look at, who's the counter disclosure assets in all this. Now, I totally believe in Bob Lazar and what his testimony, and I don't believe he's part of the cover-up or anything. I drove out to Area 51, had a meeting with him along with about 24 researchers for the first time public meeting in '93, and no recordings were allowed whatsoever, but I had my camcorder in the front row and recorded 2 hours of him being hit with some pretty savvy people, hitting him with a lot of questions. And I've checked his testimony over the decades, and it's been 100% consistent. Now, Bob believes that because of the highly compartmented structure, that they're unable to bring in more minds in the scientific community in order to reverse engineer the Zeta 2 Reticuli spacecraft Lazar was working on in order to make any significant progress. But, the highly compartmentalized operation, of course, didn't give Bob access to other projects that the government has. So, to the best of his knowledge, we haven't made much progress. And so, they grab that guy. Hey, he works for the agenda, and bring his testimony out in that way. But Bob, I believe, is completely innocent in that. And that the Zeta Reticuli craft was pretty advanced, and they probably ended up to a dead end with it because it was too far advanced.
Just on the Bob Lazar story, I think it's worth mentioning that I fully agree with you that I think Lazar is kind of like, he told truthfully exactly what happened, that he went to S4, that he saw these 9 craft and he got to work on one, and the technology was too advanced, or that the scientists at the time working on it, just didn't know what to do. But I mean, there have been people that talk about another facility at Papoose Lake called S2. I mean, this was something that Richard Doty talked about. Phil Schneider also talked about S2. And I believe there have been others that talk about S2. That S4 is kind of like almost like a flying saucer museum. It's like you have the old stuff there, but the new stuff is being worked on at S2 by the top corporations, and that's where they're churning out the working prototypes of the TR-3B and the flying saucers. But S4 you got is almost like Lazar described. It's like a museum. They've got a few people in there, and I think they probably chose Lazar to go in and work there because they thought that he would be a good person to use for putting out what effectively would be a limited hangout, which is what we are witnessing right now. That the foundations of that was set up in 1989 with Bob Lazar.
Yeah, he replaced some scientists that cut open the core for the element 115 reactor, and it was like a small nuclear reaction, so they needed a replacement. So William Tiller, saw an article in his jet car that he made, and he thought, this is an out-of-the-box kind of scientist. This is the kind of people that we could use, so they brought him in. Bob, he's had quite an experience dealing with that. Now, here we go on with this interview that Eric Davis has with Admiral Thomas Wilson, and talks about what the corporations were saying, and that they were told that the reverse engineering of the extraterrestrial craft was, quote, going on for years and years, very slow progress, agonizingly slow with little or no success. And so this is the narrative that Dr. Eric Davis puts out. And New York Times, center of the deep state's control channels, they have an interview with him, and he's out there briefing members of Congress and telling them that the lack of success with scientists had in reverse engineering off-world vehicles due to difficulties in understanding the new physics and operating in the recovered craft. And it was his belief that the reverse engineering program suffered from a lack of funding. And, that's laughable. And so obviously Dr. Eric Davis is, in my book, he's a gatekeeper. And he's wanting to indoctrinate members of Congress on the same dialogue, the same narrative that, yes, we have extraterrestrial craft, but there's no success. We don't have a secret space program because we haven't been able to figure it out, and we don't have enough money, and so forth.
I agree with you. I think he is a gatekeeper. I think his job is to put out that narrative that these technologies have been recovered, but they're just too advanced and we haven't been able to reverse engineer those. And what I find interesting about him is that he currently works for the Aerospace Corporation, and a mutual friend of ours, Dave Rossi, said that the Aerospace Corporation is the corporation that is part of an intense surveillance program of Elena Danam, and that was part and was also behind a program to kind of like besmirch her or to denigrate her publicly. And I find that interesting. Like, why would a major aerospace company like the Aerospace Corporation, having people like Dr. Eric Davis working for them, go after an extraterrestrial contactee unless the information she was putting out directly threatened their narrative?
Absolutely, Michael. What Elena is putting out, and because Elena has so much evidence to back her credibility, in fact, and as you know, scientifically verifiable evidence, she's a threat because she's revealing what's actually going on. And so they would start a whole campaign, be monitoring her and try to maybe even get some, as we did a show about counter disclosure assets, certain people that come out and they attack her and do a narrative that's opposite of what she's saying. And so when somebody comes out with a truth that goes against the deep state narrative, they want to counter that. So yeah, that's very interesting that Dr. Eric Davis is linked in with that whole group. Okay, this I found very interesting. You have the Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence, and you have other intelligence aspects here at the June 2021 hearing that Mark was going to testify at. And these guys are supposed to be, they're in charge of the UFO UAP issue, and they're supposed to have a full understanding of the operation. But most of the people who watch your channel have more knowledge than they do. You have very interesting that now these officials claim that the U.S. doesn't have this type of anti-gravity technology, and they Congressman Mike Gallagher, he brought up a very embarrassing question to them that about the two incidences. One, the Maelstrom Air Force Base incident, which Captain Robert Salas talked about, the 10 nuclear-tipped ICBMs, the UFO red glowing, goes over the launch facility and rapidly shuts them all down. And then he also brought up the Admiral Wilson memo. And both of them said, we don't have anything like that in our database. We don't know anything about this. And of course, the Admiral Wilson would have been a hot potato because it would reveal that we have reverse engineering operations, according to the memo. And so these people are basically assigned, I put the stamp of gatekeeper on both of them.
Yeah, I think they're part of this new narrative to basically reset the evidence, or to kind of like say that, well, we begin with 2004 with the USS Nimitz incident, and then 2017 with other uh, Navy encounters with UFOs. And we look at all of the official pilot reports and radar or videos that have been leaked about those. And so we look at those and a few other incidents related to that. But everything that happened before that is just kind of like ignored up until recently, I guess, with this new historical report that just came out a couple of weeks ago. So I don't know if you're going to talk about that later.
So true. Yeah, it's like history started at 2004 with the Nimitz incident. Like my testimony in 1969, the U.S. Navy reporting 70-foot diameter disc coming out of the ocean off the coast of Alaska, and secret classified reports. They ignore anything like that. Okay. Now, who has spoken in the past of an alien attack from outer space? Well, it's kind of interesting that, if the Nazi Germany had anti-gravity craft back in 1934, and they had kind of an alliance with the Rockefellers, and kind of in bed with eugenics idea and everything else, the Rockefeller Foundation funded a psychological study of public fear reaction to an alien invasion with a fake radio broadcast in 1938. Dr. Hadley Cantell, who hired Orson Welles, afterward wrote a paper called, quote, "The Invasion from Mars, a study in the psychology of panic," studying the effect of the population under the fear of an alien invasion. So it's interesting, the statistics of the people. A lot of people just freaked out. A lot of people thought it was absolutely real. Some people committed suicide. So it's kind of like they were analyzing how the public would react to an alien invasion. Then 1955, you have, despite the CIA putting a top secret gag order, General Douglas MacArthur told the New York Times, quote, "The nations of the world will have to unite, for the next war will be an interplanetary war. The nations of the earth must someday make a common front against attack by people from other planets." And then you have 1987 at the United Nations, Ronald Reagan's speech. It says, quote, "Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to recognize this common bond. I occasionally think how quickly our differences would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world." And then in 2014, President Bill Clinton on the Jimmy Kimmel Show, regarding the benefits of an alien invasion, he was quoted, note the tagline on the bottom of the video, "We are not alone." They keep using that one. It says, "If we were visited someday, I wouldn't be surprised," Clinton said. "I just hope it's not like Independence Day. It may be the only way to unite this increasingly divided world of ours. Think about all the differences among people of Earth would seem small if we were threatened by a space invader." That's the whole theory of Independence Day. Everybody gets together and makes nice. It's kind of, parroting what Ronald Reagan was saying. It's kind of interesting, his choice of words. So, today there has been several indications in the past that a plan has long been in place to create a false flag alien invasion. So what evidence is there for a plan for a false flag alien invasion? In 1967, this leaked document concludes that war, or a credible substitute for war, is necessary for governments to maintain power. In other words, the need to continually create ongoing enemies through false flag events to perpetuate war on this planet. Now, when President Lyndon Johnson he hit the roof, he was so upset, he suppressed it for all time. I went through it, and on page 51, there was this interesting statement made. It said, quote, "It had been hotly argued that such a menace would offer the last best hope of peace, etc., by uniting mankind against the danger of destruction by creatures from other planets or outer space. Experiments, now this is interesting, this part. Experiments have been proposed to test the credibility of an out-of-our-world invasion threat. It is possible that a few of the more difficult to explain flying saucer incidences of recent years were in fact early experiments of this kind. I find that statement kind of interesting, don't you, Michael?
Yeah, I think this attempt to use a alien threat and to kind of manufacture that in a way to perpetuate the kind of military industrial complex is really important. That that President Eisenhower said that the threat that America faces is from the military industrial complex, that they're going to threaten our freedoms. And so we see how this kind of alien false flag event would feed into that, because, yeah, that would be a great way to kind of like deprive Americans of their civil liberties, to concoct an alien threat invasion, and people would, out of kind of like national security, out of kind of like the desire to help the US win a supposed war, would give up their freedoms.
Yeah, in this document, it's kind of indicating that they've done what they call experiments of this kind. In other words, how do you do an experiment of this kind unless you have anti-gravity craft that you can create an experiment with? So it's just kind of interesting, the wording on that. And then another fellow witness, in 1977, Werner von Braun was dying of cancer, was on his deathbed, and Dr. Cal Rosen testified at the National Press Club that he was shown advanced plans to create a series of false flag enemies, the first of which would be the Soviets. This would be a first in a series. Now, when you understand that Alan Dulles, along with General Reinhard Gehlen, was giving false estimates of what was happening in the Soviet Union, to the government, to Truman, you can see how that helped led to the Cold War. And in a way, it was kind of like a false flag by giving false evidence. The second one, which hadn't happened yet, but 4 months later, it happened on 9/11 after we gave testimony in May of 2001 on 9/11. The next one would be rogue nations, which nations such as North Korea, Iran, and then you have asteroids. We haven't heard anything lately that I have, but he would repeat over and over again, she said, that the final card would be the extraterrestrial threat, but it is all a lie.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning here that there was another researcher, a French Canadian researcher by the name of, actually his name escapes me, but he wrote a book called Project Bluebeam, and his name was Serge Monast. And so in 1995, he wrote this book exposing Project Bluebeam, and he said that the fake alien invasion was actually part of a more elaborate series of events that would result in a kind of like fake alien savior event. So you have the invasion, and then there would be like a positive aliens, supposed positive aliens would come in and rescue us, and they would be part of a kind of like a contrived alien savior event. So he described all of that. And I mean, he was way ahead of his time. And the following year, after his book was published, I think only a few months after Phil Schneider was suicided, Serge Monast dies of a heart attack, even though he's in his 40s. So I think he was correct that that this fake alien invasion is part of a kind of much larger, more elaborate Project Bluebeam that would result in first a threat and then a kind of salvation event.
Well, what you're describing is similar. I'm trying to remember his name. His last name was Rice. He was a secret space program whistleblower.
Jason Rice.
Yes, that's it. And he spoke that the Sakaar would come in with some really nasty extraterrestrials and the people of this planet that have reached a certain level where they haven't had the certain technological level to really defend themselves, would come in, they would devastate, and then they would come in as the saviors, but then they would have to accommodate their needs and so forth. I remember that.
Yeah, that was the Dark Fleet or the Nachtwaffen. That that the Sakaar would arrange for some kind of threat
right.
for a world, and then the kind of Nachtwaffen would come in as the rescuers, because they would be human, Nordic, blonde-looking guys, and they'd rescue this world from the insectoid or reptilian or dog beings that were ravaging
Right,
the
the
world.
wolf-looking kind of scary things, yeah. But it would come at a price, and so that was the whole psyop, I guess you would call it. Then I found it interesting that Anonymous found this Benson Strategy Group document that recommended a false flag alien invasion to salvage Hillary Clinton's campaign, because everybody was voting for Trump, and they were trying to figure out how to keep the Trump voters from coming in. And so they were looking at different scenarios. They have the shooting war in the neighborhood, you have a biblical event, external invading force. But the one that got the most percentage, according to their analysis here, was an attack by extraterrestrial. And so it recommended one called Fire Sign, which is a false flag extraterrestrial invasion using advanced holographic technology in order to save her campaign. But of course, that didn't help her. But they got another one of their assets, in operation.
I think that Benenson document, I think that that's a very important document, and I think that they really did go through some kind of brainstorming sessions to see if they could pull it off. And in the end, I think they decided not to go with it because too many people were alert to the whole false flag alien event, because of Stephen Greer, because of Serge Manasse, because of Werner von Braun, Carl Rosen. Too many people knew about that. So I think that they realized, that the controllers, the deep state, realized that they wouldn't succeed. People would see through it. But I think that now, we're talking, 8 years later, I think that they've realized that doing a false flag alien invasion where it's like, oh, we're being attacked by aliens, people won't believe it. But I think what they've realized is that people will believe that, oh, we're being attacked by UFOs, but we don't know who they are. They could be Russians, they could be Chinese, they could be interdimensionals, they could be from under the oceans, they could be from off-world. We simply don't know, but we're being attacked. God, we've got to fund Space Force and get out there and go into this, suspend the elections and suspend civil liberties because we're being attacked by UFOs. So I think that, to my mind, is why this kind of narrative has emerged over the last few years since that New York Times article in 2017, always focusing on the UFOs being an unknown national security threat.
Oh, yeah, you can see how desperate they are. Hillary was the Bilderberg meeting's choice, and they had a 16-year plan to destroy our country. So they didn't want Mr. T in there. Okay, don't be fooled. So I'm just going to run through a little analysis of some of these narratives and agendas. When you look back through history, just to get an overview of all these different elements that you have going on, these different narratives. You have decades of denial and diversion. Here's a very brief, historical review of the 1940s, the 60s psyops. And there's so much more in all this, but looking at 1947, the Roswell crash, which they used a weather balloon cover story, and then I believe it was Air Force General Vandenberg started Project Grudge to deny the extraterrestrial evidence, and then the CIA had a tabloid newspaper putting out discrediting stories, so people in their grocery store checkout would say, "Oh, this is just garbage," the UFO thing. And then General Douglas MacArthur has a suppression order. Project Blue Book, which started from the Condon Committee, and there's a leaked document says the trick will be, to make it seem as though this is a credible scientist, but finding nothing. And so Project Blue Book was to deny the extraterrestrial evidence, and it terminated in '69. Interesting, the Vatican wanted to have containment, and they had, in the top secret MJ-12 annual report. So they didn't. The Vatican didn't want to have, in case mass sightings occur, they even had a war plan figured out in case mass sightings ever occurred. And George Adamski, we talked about earlier, the Robinson panel, formed by the CIA, to deny the UFO reality. And then in '61, NASA, Nazi NASA, sponsored the Brookings report that further supports the denying of the UFO ET evidence. Any thoughts on any of those, Michael?
Oh, well, yeah, there's a lot of kind of like information that each of those can be unpacked. I think we've already covered some of that.
Yes.
But definitely these crash retrieval operations, they've been going on for a long time, and those craft that have been retrieved, they've been taken to these top secret military facilities where they get to work on those with corporations, and the corporations take over.
Indeed. So, all this time, it's all denial. There's nothing, it's swamp gas, right? There's nothing to UFOs. And then all of a sudden, this whole narrative changes. In 2001, the mainstream media wants the public to know, we are not alone. Although we were disclosing, 57 different species, faster than light craft. We have 0-point energy. President CIA directors being denied access. NASA's airbrushing the UFOs out before releasing to the public, just on and on. Incredible testimonies at the National Press Club. But what they did was they made it sound as though we wanted to have a congressional hearing on simply the reality of UFOs, and that we are not alone. I was on CNN, and CBS interviewed me, and the same exact tagline, "We are not alone." Now, what they did, the deep state, is they use the idea that we're not alone for their agenda. So they're very clever in how they can take a situation that could be compromising to them, do a limited hangout, and kind of spin it in such a way to fit their agenda. And so in 2001, 21 witnesses testified. Each one of us stated we're willing to testify under oath. That's penalty of perjury, And the mainstream media basically did the "we are not alone," and as I mentioned earlier, just that we're seeking to have a congressional hearing on simply the reality of UFOs. But that was not what Admiral Wilson wanted the public to know about. He wanted the whole thing exposed, but they were able to effectively sanitize it.
It's very interesting, what you said about that phrase, "we are not alone," that was how they wanted to kind of pitch the Disclosure Project, because all the witnesses, the 21 witnesses, including yourself, you all brought out elements of a cover-up, of a high-level cover-up from the military, the government, of the existence of extraterrestrial visitors or these advanced technologies operating. But what the major media did was they kind of frame it all as "we are not alone," which is kind of like a scientific speculative question. So they took it away from the political national security question of like, well, there's a cover-up of all of the data and the evidence, and we've presented multiple witnesses showing you that there's a cover-up. They they twisted the narrative, or they kind of framed the narrative as, oh, this kind of scientific speculative question. Oh, we are not alone.
Oh, and they did it in lockstep across all the, I traveled across the United States to major cities with Dr. Greer and the newspaper, camera people, the television networks would come in and they would, make fun of it and, different ways and, make it all sound like, it was, like in San Francisco, they said, "Oh, the Disclosures Project's looking to aliens to solve the world's energy problems." That's a type of thing. Okay, and then after the "We are not alone," what a perfect follow-up to have the alien threat narrative. And so in 2017, the mainstream media wants the public to know now that the government knows UFOs are real and that they are a potential threat. And so we have, coming out of the New York Times, of course, this advanced aerospace threat identification program. That's this Pentagon program that's headed by Luis Elizondo. And that it's interesting, when that came out, if you remember, Michael, back in December 2017, it got saturated on all the media, and it went on for about at least 3 days. You kept hearing about the Tic Tac and the air, it just saturated it. So your grandmother knows about the Tic Tac. So they wanted to make sure that the public was aware that the government knows UFOs are real and they're a potential threat. And then shortly after, the History Channel, one of their assets, is further supported. The unprecedented mainstream media support of the AATIP program run by Luis Elizondo, team up with others like John Podesta, email leak, I want to have a pizza for an hour, that kind of guy. To educate the public to the alien threat to our national security. There's no doubt there's a very controlled narrative offering a limited disclosure of the UFO ET situation to the mainstream public awareness as an alien threat. And so, in opposite of that, we have some perspectives that believe all the aliens are not a threat, but they're benevolent in nature. You have Monsignor Balducci. He's a theologian of the Vatican and exorcist. He said in September of 2000, he says, quote, "Besides lower than humanity, there cannot be in this universe." God cannot be foolish to entrust all his hopes for intelligent beings on just this planet. And then in 2008, you did a good coverage on this. Interview with Jesuit Frater Gabriel Fooms stated that extraterrestrial life is likely to be more ethically evolved than humans, and may not have experienced a fall and may be free of original sin, to remain in full friendship with their creator, making it possible to regard them as our brothers. And so, unlike here on this planet where we had a fall and we don't have original sin, these other beings on other planets don't have that situation, and therefore they must be more ethical and more benevolent. Any thoughts, Michael, on that?
Yes, I think it's very interesting that you have, on the one side, people pushing the UFOs, this kind of like threat narrative, and on the other hand, you have the idea that the extraterrestrials are uniformly positive. So to me, this kind of like sets up what Serge Monast was describing back in 1995 with his Project Bluebeam book, that you have your alien false flag event, the threat narrative plays out in that. And so UFOs appear, they attack cities, you have destruction, you have people really taking it seriously and getting worried. Is our life about to end? And then all of a sudden, these kind of like beneficent, benevolent aliens show up to kind of like say, oh, well, we're here to save you. And you have a lot of holographic technology to show Muhammad or to show Jesus or to show Buddha, to convince people that this is like, oh, this is a world-changing end of times event. But it's all contrived. It's all part of a manipulation. So I think what Stephen Greer and what the Vatican is doing, I think plays into that Serge Monast kind of dynamic of first you have the alien threat and then you have the alien salvation event.
Yes, it's interesting. I've been friends with Dr. Stephen Greer, worked with him for years on energy projects and things, so I know him quite well. And I respect a lot of that he's doing. And I respect that, he went to the National Press Club and brought forth, and, since 1993 to the year 2001, he brought approximately 500 military witnesses, 21 of which I was one of them. And he had his life threatened not to go before. So, he was very courageous to do that. So he's done a lot of work, and he wants to bring out the energy technology, and I respect a lot of that. But, he has stated, interestingly, that that he believes that all the extraterrestrial races are benevolent, and that his rationale is that any race that has obtained interstellar travel would have evolved spiritually and be benevolent and peaceful. He cites the fact that if there was a benevolent ET race, that with their advanced technology, they would be able to wipe out Earth without a fight. And that we're still breathing the clean, free air of Earth is testament to that fact. And he says that the witnesses that have claimed encounters with benevolent ET races, like the Draco and the Greys and so forth, have been subjected to false implanted memories whose purpose is to justify a future planned alien false flag attack. And so this is his perspective. He's stated this numerous times, and I just find it interesting that, he's a very intelligent person, and I'm sure he's exposed to a lot of information. But to consider that there's so many witnesses in different situations that I don't believe you could say that they all have been planted a false screen memory in their memory, and it's just not consistent. So whenever something's not consistent, I always think, well, maybe there's an agenda behind it.
Yeah, he does offer this kind of reductionist explanation that all alleged extraterrestrials in doing these negative things to people, that they're programmed life forms that have been created by the military industrial complex to confuse and to intimidate people. That's a very reductionist viewpoint, because I think it's much more complex than that. I don't doubt that some of these extraterrestrials involved in abductions are, like he says, programmed life forms, but to say that they're all the ones doing negative things are programmed life forms created by the military intelligence community, I mean, that is really, I think, too reductionistic.
That's a hard one to accept. In an Admiral Wilson memo, it revealed that not all the ET abductions were extraterrestrial, and that there no doubt is programmed life forms, and no doubt if we had anti-gravity craft, that there is some nefarious activity going on there that could be instilling. There was several people who've had military MILAB abductions, and it would be something that would promote fear of extraterrestrials, and could go along, as he's saying, to support this fear of a false flag alien invasion. So it was revealed in the Admiral Wilson memo that some of the abductions were not extraterrestrial. Okay, and then we have the other extreme in the mix. We have all the extraterrestrials are evil demons narrative. And so one this doesn't speak for all religious leaders. One perspective I find kind of interesting that I've heard echoed through other people who have, evangelical religious beliefs that the extraterrestrials are demonic. Evangelist minister Pat Robertson stated that, quote, "Space aliens, those beings in UFOs, are really demonic intelligences, fallen angels. Aliens will reveal themselves as demonic entities that delight in doing Satan's work. The planet will be in torment and turmoil until Jesus returns to deal the final blow to the minions of evil." And so this is some perspective of some of the people in certain religious factions. So it's important to take a look at the people who think they're all benevolent and think other people think they're all demons. Now, it's interesting that back in '96, there was a report of the Select Committee of Intelligence has a hearing on the CIA's use of journalists and clergy in intelligence operations. It's noted that not only is the CIA utilizing journalists in their mainstream media, but they also have utilized the clergy in the church in order to promote the CIA's agenda. So you won't have to wonder how much of influence goes in which direction with the intelligence community and the church.
Well, I know that James Jesus Angleton, who had responsibility over the classified UFO files while he was running the CIA's counterintelligence division, that he had responsibility over CIA counterintelligence. He had also control over the Vatican desk. So he was also kind of coordinating with the Vatican on all of these classified UFO files, and also with Israel's Mossad. So he had control over those three files. So that's interesting that this has been something picked up by biographers of James Jesus Angleton, that he had those three primary responsibilities, and each one of them is very much tied into this whole extraterrestrial UFO Nazi breakaway faction in Antarctica, and the Mossad would naturally be interested in a breakaway Nazi faction in Antarctica, given the relationship or the history between Jews and Nazis.
Not a surprise, Angleton, being himself, a Knight of Malta, working with the Vatican, and he was a protege of Alan Dulles, who was also a Knight of Malta, and so there's a lot of link with the Vatican and the Nazis, as we both know. Alan Dulles was highly instrumental into the infiltration. Okay. Evidence of the true reality of regressive extraterrestrials. Now, there's more than just two, but the two seem to be impacted and interacted with our planet quite a bit. You have the Draco reptilians, the Sakaar Empire. In the 1930s, the Nazi SS entered into an alliance with the Draco, and they received advanced technology which violated the Prime Directive. They performed, human trafficking for slave labor and food. Evidence from multiple witnesses within the secret space program, such as William Tompkins. It wasn't in the space program, but he had knowledge of it. Our friend Jean-Charles Moyen, Tony Rodriguez, Elena Danan, and so many others have had encounters with these reptilian beings. Then you have the Nebu Greys from Orion. 1954, MJ-12 gave consent by signing the Grenada Treaty, which allowed millions on Earth to be abducted for their hybrid program for the eventual simulation by the Nebu of our planet. Evidence of hundreds of abductee testimonies and researchers such as Bud Hopkins, David Jacobs, and so many more substantiate this reality. So this has been impacting and interfering with our planet going back to at least the 1930s. Fortunately, Our solar system was liberated thanks to the help of the Galactic Federation of Worlds working together with our Earth Alliance. They removed the Nibiru Greys, the Draco, and the Dark Fleet Nazis from our solar system. Now, what evidence is there that these regressive ETs have been removed? The Arlington Institute, John Peterson, runs this U.S. Navy-funded think tank. He cited 3 independent sources confirming that the regressive ET groups have been driven out of our solar system by positive ETs. And this is the exact scenario that was introduced by Elena Danaan in 2021, who is the emissary for the Galactic Federation of Worlds. Elena's information received through an advanced technology implant, and it's not channeling or anything. She actually has technology that communicates to the Galactic Federation, has shown multiple scientifically verified evidences to back her credibility. So we have 2 of these very credible sources that, let us know that, thank God, these guys are out of our solar system. So now
and that is a big and that is a big debate right now in the kind of exopolitics, UFO disclosure community. There's quite a few people saying that, the negatives haven't left, and that we're kind of like dealing with them and we're screwed. And then on the other hand, you have what Elena, John Peterson, and others are saying, that that the regressive have left. And I've interviewed a few people, and Alex Collier says the same, as does James Gilliland. JP has been on missions where they actually, Space Command sent out a delegation or a flotilla to actually meet up with the arrival of these advanced benevolent extraterrestrials. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of evidence to substantiate that the regressives have left. But of course, those that believe otherwise, I think they're probably being manipulated by the remaining minions of these regressive ETs that kind of worship them, kind of like as like a religion.
Well, they always come up with whenever the truth comes out, there's always a counter narrative that comes out to counter that, and there's more indication that this is true, and that fortunately they don't have their upper echelon of regressive ETs to work with, which have formidable capabilities. Now just the Earth minions we have to deal with, and it's somewhat up to us to clean house on our planet. And so this is very encouraging news, and I believe it's real. Okay, today in 2024, what is the government's official narrative? Now, this just came out a few days ago you're aware of. The Defense Department's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, it's founded in July of 2022. I guess they needed to get rid of the advanced aerial threat, get the word threat out of there. And this sounds more, it's like an all-domain anomaly. It doesn't sound so threatening. So they're supposedly the ones that are accumulating all this information and addressing this subject. Now, in March this year, which is this month, they released their official report, which covered all official U.S. investigative efforts from 1945 to present, and examined classified and unclassified document, archives. It was unequivocal in its conclusions, finding that, quote, no evidence that any U.S. government investigation, academic-sponsored research, or official review panel has confirmed that any sighting of a UAP represented extraterrestrial technology. And they also said no evidence that extraterrestrial intelligence has visited Earth, or that authorities have recovered crashed alien spacecraft and are hiding it from the public. Now, in summary, the evidence indicates, going back to the beginning of the 20th century, reveals anti-gravity craft have indeed been developed. Psychological efforts have been made to keep the public believing that there is nothing to the UFO ET, like the Robinson report and so forth. Suppression of anti-gravity technology and the Nazi space program has been active since the end of World War II. It had to do anything in order to keep the public from being aware that the Nazis have this advanced technology. Elements of the government claim we have ET craft reverse engineering efforts, but have made little or no progress, like Dr. Eric Davis. The UFO UAP hearing officials claim we do not have ET craft reverse engineering, and that the UFO UAPs, as they call them, are totally unknown. They have no idea what it is. A plan was made to falsely create an enemy from space with their anti-gravity craft to unite the world against this enemy. The Vatican and Dr. Greer believe all the ETs are benevolent, while some religious leaders say they are demons. And in 2001, the media wanted the public to know that we are not alone after the Disclosure Project gave witness testimonies. And in 2017, they took that we are not alone, and the media showed the government now knows about UFOs are real and that they're a potential threat. But the fact of the matter is, we have developed anti-gravity technology going back to the 1950s. There is a secret space program called Solar Warden that has been active since the 1980s. Regressive extraterrestrials have negatively impacted our planet since at least the 1930s. These extraterrestrials have been removed from our solar system with the help of positive ETs in 2021. In 2023, I believe it was in January, a disclosure plan was given to the Earth Alliance, General Van Herk, by the Galactic Federation of Worlds. And it's supposed to be this incredibly brilliant, genius plan that will unfold. And so, in conclusion, since they're going to continue to deny. And so, just as you pointed out, Michael, without truthful disclosure, what appears to be left is a type of catastrophic disclosure, something that they don't have any control over, where the ETs possibly make themselves known to all the people of our planet. This would then be followed by the world recognizing that these constitutionally illegal secret government operations have deceived the world for multiple generations, are now exposed, and now the time for full truth and history of extraterrestrial interactions to be revealed to everyone. Without these illegal secret government elements being able to hide behind secrecy any longer, then this enables the dismantling of their control structure, which they infiltrated and seized control of our media and information systems to use them against the people. The public, no longer being psychologically manipulated, ushers in a new era where we realize that we've been pitted against each other, while our true enemy remained hidden. This unites the world because we understand how we've all been deceived, and the world has, as a whole, would unite and vows to never allow this happen again. I believe that this allows us to evolve as a peaceful civilization and join other benevolent civilizations of the Galactic Federation of Worlds and enjoy the technology benefits that this now allows. And that's the end of the story.
Well, that's a fantastic overview, Dan, of the state of affairs when it comes to where our planet stands with all of this conflicting data on extraterrestrials. And I think that there's good reason to understand why it's so confusing, because this is what the deep state wants. This is what the minions of the Nebu Grays and the Sakars want. They want there to be confusion. They don't want people to kind of like embrace what's about to come. And I think what's about to come, as you've pointed out, from sources like Elena Danaan, JP, Jean-Charles Moyen, and many others, is a Star Trek future, is exactly that the positive military, the white hats, that they are wanting this full disclosure to happen, this kind of catastrophic disclosure that some people think, oh, well, that's a negative thing. Well, it's negative only because the deep state has shut the door. Like you said, that historical report shuts the door on disclosure because it says, well, after 70 years or 80 years of investigating this UFO phenomenon, there's no empirical evidence to support any of that. Well, we know that's a total lie, and that's what you've presented here in your really masterful kind of description presentation of all the data. We know that's a lie, but that the white hats are kind of behind the scenes nudging us forward because they want this catastrophic disclosure. They want all the truth to come out because they want us to move into a Star Trek future. So I think the future is a very, very bright one, that even though at the moment it's very confusing, very scary, there's a lot of wars threatening to break out and escalate, and there's always the threat of this kind of alien false flag event being played out on us. At the end of the day, I think that the white hats are going to win out because there's too many people that are awake now, that are alert to what's going on. And at the end of the day, the US Navy, the Space Force, they all want a Star Trek future. They want the shiny new anti-gravity TR-3Bs, cigar, the flying aircraft carriers. They want all that. So why would they keep it covered up? It makes no sense. So they want this Star Trek future. So I think that's why we're going to get it.
Absolutely, Michael. Just imagine, what you're doing is so important of educating the public. Yeah, I believe it's all about public awareness because we're all kind of connected in this collective mind on this planet, and that the more of us become awake, it kind of becomes exponential. More and more people become awake, aware of the truth that's been hidden all these decades, and that when there's a certain critical mass, they're not going to. The lies are becoming more and more transparent, and the mainstream media is becoming more obvious in how it's attempting to pit us against each other in every way possible, to keep us fighting amongst ourselves and to keep us in fear. And this game has to end. And once the truth starts to come out, and I believe it's coming out more and more, we can then, we have a long history of false flags. I was in Vietnam with the combat action because of the false flag of Vietnam, and so many soldiers have gone in the Middle East wars and so forth. And there's so many wars, when you really look at it, have been created falsely because of agendas behind the thing. And so if we can evolve as a peaceful civilization and no longer have these controlling deep state elements controlling our information systems, and we can evolve. I mean, my God, how incredible to be able to have, the medbed technologies, have teleportation, faster than light craft. We can clean up our planet with the technologies. It would be just the most beautiful future for us, once these deceptions and things have been fully brought into awareness and transformed for the good of everyone on this planet.
So, Dan, do you have any upcoming conferences that you're going to be presenting at that you want people to know about?
I'll be with you remotely in France, talking about some of the crystal technology. I've been working with Elena Danan, with an off-planet scientist. I'm working with the science team developing that. And then I will be at the Galactic Spiritual Informers Conference in September and this year, and I'll be giving the latest technology that's, we've been going an ongoing question-answer session since April of 2022 of advanced technology that they use on their world and that they're willing to share with us. So I'm very honored and privileged to be able to do so, and to work with my dear friend Elena Danan, who's provided these communications. So that's basically it.
And I think you have a website. Do you want to just give people the name of the website where people can go and kind of look at some of the data you've accumulated over the years?
It was after I testified in Washington. A media company wanted me to write an article on the control of media, and I put it up on thewebmatrix.net. And then the crystal technology that is kind of an extension from the work I did in the 80s with Dr. Marcel Vogel, who was IBM's head scientist. And we're expanding that with information from Jen Hanaridion, and that's on marcelvogel.org.
Well, I want to thank you, Dan, for coming on Exopolitics today and really giving us a very rich and detailed look into this lie that we do not have reverse engineered alien technologies. So thank you for exposing that and for all your research in bringing all this information into the public arena.
Honored to join you, Michael, and that we can bring this to the public. It's a great honor. Thank you.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.